What is going on, guys? Welcome to a Viva Nutrition video series on how to weigh food. And today we're going to be going through some different areas and some different things that I see a lot of people struggling with as far as macro tracking and understanding exactly how to properly estimate and accurately measure foods. So in this video, we're going to be covering a few different areas. So make sure you hang tight, have a piece of paper that you can write things down, and because we're gonna walk you through some important principles, some important aspects as far as food logging and food weighing. First, the first thing we're gonna be covering is some food weighing principles, understanding different areas between obviously metric versus imperial system, what kind of things to use. We're going to be going over how to use a food scale and what are some of the things that you're going to see on the food scale and how to adjust it according to that. We're also going to be teaching you how to weigh certain foods depending on their natural state. So there's dried foods, we have some wet foods, such as, for example, like a peanut butter or almond butter. We have things like fruit, we have bread, we have options like, like cooked foods, for example, such as chicken and cooked rice. And I'm going to walk you through the process of understanding how not only how to weigh all these different foods, but also how to make sure you add it into a food tracker like MyFItnessPal. At the end, we're gonna wrap it up with some of like the typical questions I get all the time about tracking foods, just to ensure that I can answer as many things as possible and you're able to take this on, on your own, and you have everything that you need to succeed in the nutrition process. So let's jump right into it. The first thing we're going to be covering is going to be weighing food principles. So the first thing you're going to need for food weighing is, of course, a food scale. You can get a bunch of different ones on Amazon, and there are some really fancy ones that are showing like the nutrition facts label and stuff like that. And to be honest, I don't think they're worth the money. They become way too complicated to use, and a lot of times they're not as accurate. You can get one for like 10 bucks, something simple that have an on, a tear, and a mode button. And literally today, I'm going to walk you through the components of a scale so you understand exactly what you have in front of you and how to use it properly. So let's get right into it. The first thing, I have a typical one. I think we got this from Walmart, I believe, but then you can get one again on Amazon for like 10 bucks. It's like the typical one that you get, like the Amazon, the Prime Choice, or like the typical one that most people buy, and that's the one that you need, okay? So a food scale has two, usually some of them have 3 buttons. This one has 2. So I have a mode, which is going to change the system that it actually measures, so versus metrics versus imperial. I'm gonna show you some differences on there. You can also have like this 0 and the on and off button. 0 or tearing means like whenever you weigh something and you put it on there and you put it on 0 and you want to tear it, meaning like you want to make sure that whatever you put on the scale, it's zeroed out. Let's say, for example, you're putting a cup and you're actually putting it on there and you want to make sure that it's zeroed. You want to hit that tear button or 0 again, just to make sure whatever you're adding is not taking into consideration the actual utensil that you're using. So that's going to be something that you need to remember, because a lot of times if you miss that, it's not going to be an accurate measurement. So that is the first thing that you need to understand as far as like food scales. As far as mode, let's get into understanding metric versus imperial system. In the United States, most standards as far as like measurements use imperial system. That means that most measurements are done in things like ounces, they're done in things like inches and options like this. But then when we're looking at metric, which the rest of the world is using except for the US, you're looking at things such as, for example, like grams and milliliters, and instead of inches, you're using meters and centimeters and things like that. So it's very important for you to become familiarized with the metric system as far as food weighing, because it's going to be far more accurate than using just ounces. I am not saying you cannot use ounces. You can, but it's not going to always be the choice that I would go for as far as like food weighing. So, but then you just need to understand that when you click on mode button on the food scale, you can switch between, and I can actually tell you here as I'm looking at them, you can go into fluid ounces or ounces. You can go into milliliters. You can go into grams, which is like the one that I typically use, and you can use one into pounds and ounces, which is obviously if you were weighing something big that you know it's going to be more than or there's going to be at least a pound, which is about 16 ounces. So that is the first thing that you need to understand as far as this entire process. So in the next part, what we're going to do is we're going to be covering how to weigh specific foods according again to their natural state, whether it's dry, wet, if it's like a fruit, options like this, or if it's something cooked. All right, so one thing you need to also understand is weighing equivalences. And this is something that you're going to ensure that you need to always keep in mind. So we're gonna try to put something on the screen so you have something that you can write on with. But here's the thing. So always remember that 1 gram, here's some important rules that you need to understand. Just because you weigh 1 gram of, let's say, strawberries or 100 grams of strawberries doesn't mean that it's 100 grams of carbohydrates. Again, let's say, for example, strawberries is mainly carbohydrates. Just because you weigh 100 grams of net weight, which is exactly what shows on a scale, doesn't mean that it's 100 grams of carbohydrates. They have different equivalences, and I want to make sure that you understand and remember that. Now, let's talk about net weight specifically. Here's some things that you need to remember. 1 ounce is equivalent to 30 grams. I'm going to repeat that. 1 ounce is equivalent to 30 grams when you're looking at something that is dry. When you're looking at something that is wet, for example, like a liquid, 1 ounce is equal to 30 milliliters. They're about the same. You always need to remember that. Also, looking at specifically at utensils, 1 cup is going to be equal to, let me actually get it in here. So 1 cup is going to be equal to about 8 ounces. So I'm going to repeat that. Sorry, I got a little slip up in there. 1 cup is going to be equal to 8 ounces. Always remember that. So that means half a cup is going to be 4 ounces. If you wanted to convert that, all that to grams, you just need to remember the equivalents that I mentioned at the beginning. So if 1 ounce is 30 grams, 8 ounces is going to be what? 8 times 3 is going to be 8 times 2, 16, like 240 grams. Sorry, I'm terrible at math, but that's obviously something that you can remember. So that's something that you need to understand as far as equivalences. And I want to make sure that if you're watching this video, you get access to a simple chart that is going to help you understand the food weighing equivalences so it's easier for you to navigate the process. All right, so the first thing I'm going to teach you how to weigh is going to be dry foods, things that you can find in a package that you can look at the label. The first example we're going to use is going to be cashew blueberry cluster. So as you can see on the screen, these are the nutrition facts label. Here's some things that you need to understand when you're weighing food that you can look at labels. The first thing that you're going to notice is going to be the serving size. The serving size is sometimes going to be presented in things like cups or sometimes tablespoons. In this example, you're going to see that it's presented in cups, but right next to it in parentheses, you're going to see the amount in weight in grams. That is the most accurate thing to weigh it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you what 1 cup is going to be, which is actually the serving size that you see on there, but also in grams on the scale. So let's get right into it. So the first thing is we need to make sure that the scale is zeroed out, and I'm going to switch it to mode to be put on grams. As you can see, you don't have a measurement called cups, of course, in a weight scale because it's not a measurement of net weight. So I have it set up. The first thing I'm going to put is I'm going to put my plate first. As you can see, there's 479 grams already on there, which is the weight of the plate. I need to zero that out. So I'm going to zero it, and now it's ready to go. I'm going to take, for example, now I have the cereal. So let's say I'm actually going to use cups to be able to measure this. So I go, so you can see sometimes like the inaccuracies. 1 serving of blueberry clusters cashew cereal, it's about 52 grams, which is about a cup. This is, I'm actually going to use the full cup on here. So I'm going to try to add this on there. Some things are going to slip out. Okay. So this is about 1 cup, measure in a cup. I'm going to dump it into this. That represents 43 grams. The serving size, it's 52. That means obviously that the measurement I did, I actually underreported that. So I'm going to add in here what an actual full serving is going to be, which is going to be a little bit more That's 55 grams, which is kind of close enough. But that's a simple way that you measure cereal, for example, or some dry food ingredient. And you can kind of see it is ready to go, so you know exactly there's about a cup on one serving, which is what's presented on the label. Now, we're going to put that to the side, and now we're going to be measuring, for example, something like nuts or almonds in this case. So in here we have raw almonds. And we're going to put up on the screen like an example of that. I don't remember exactly what brand is this, but most of them are going to be, this is just like shaved almonds. And we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to grab, for example, something like a little cup like this. I'm going to put it on the scale. I'm going to zero it out. So that's obviously the first thing we need to do. And I'm going to say 1 tablespoon, for example. For things like nuts and seeds, like the calories on those things can actually go up very quickly. So you need to make sure you're careful with that. And when we go over things like almond butter in just a second, you're going to realize the difference that it makes. So if you have this in zero, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon. And I'm going to add it. That is about 12 grams. Typically portion sizes for some of these different things are going to be, depending for fats, are going to be anywhere between 15 to 30 grams. So let's say we're just trying to weigh, let's say 15 grams. So that's about, let's say 20. So it's about 19 grams, close enough. And obviously I know exactly that this is about 1 and some change as far as like tablespoons of shaved almonds. A lot of times like we just kind of measure things like when we eyeball it, and that is like the part of it specifically in things that contain fats that is going to be highly inaccurate when you're doing the tracking process. So that's the first thing that you need to understand. Hopefully you found this helpful as far as how to track dry foods. We'll move on to how to track and how to weigh wet foods in just a second. All right, so let's move on to wet ingredients. So wet ingredients are going to be things like obviously like milk or obviously water, but water has no calories, so you don't have to really think about that. But also some other wet ingredients include things like sauces or things like almond butter or peanut butter. So this is very tricky because a lot of times when you think you're adding 1 tablespoon of almond butter or peanut butter, 1 tablespoon for many different people could mean many different things. And I'm going to prove that to you here today as we're weighing some of these different things. I have here Trader Joe's raw almond butter. I'm going to read the ingredients and the stuff that is in here. 2 tablespoons is 1 serving size, contains about 32 grams of net weight. That is the amount in weight that we're gonna look in here on the scale. So I also have in here 1 tablespoon. I'm going to give you an example of what for some people may represent a tablespoon and what that is. Technically speaking, if we only measure 1 tablespoon, it's half of that, so that would be 16 grams weight on the scale. So let's do it right now, and let's go ahead and test it out. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, actually we're gonna use, well, I'm just gonna use this little cup in here so you can see it as we're adding it. So that's zeroed out because I think that's what I used before, so it's good to go and ready to roll. I'm going to add what I may think, or what some of my clients may think, maybe 1 full tablespoon of almond butter. That's what some people may consider 1 tablespoon of almond butter. I'm going to go ahead and dump it in there. You want to know what the number was? 32 grams. So that 1 tablespoon that I just measured as a tablespoon was actually 2. That's where a lot of discrepancies in total calorie intake come in many different people. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. When you're actually measuring, I'm going to zero this out just so I can prove this point. When you're truly measuring 1 tablespoon of, for example, almond butter, it needs to be something that is like super to, like, it's a lot less when you kind of like see in there. So if I weigh it, that is going to be 16 grams. That is half a serving or 1 tablespoon only. That's why things like this can make a big difference, because you're going from 2 tablespoons technically is 200 calories, and if you measure 1 only because you thought it was 1, that's 100 calories less. If you do that 3 times a day, that is 300 to 400 calories extra that you may be consuming that you think you're not. So the lack of awareness that exists sometimes around this, it's something that you need to make sure that you fix, and this is a way to do it. All right, so now we're going to learn is how to weigh fruit, which is actually pretty simple. It's very similar to weighing dried ingredients such as cereal, but a lot of times you don't have an actual label that you can look at. But it's pretty much the same thing. So you're gonna grab a plate. I'm gonna use one of these like flat ones so you can kind of see. And let's say, for example, we're making a bowl of fruit with different kinds of ingredients and different things on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the plate, tear it as usual, as I mentioned here in the beginning. So this is now zeroed out. I have, for example, some strawberries in here, some bananas, and some blueberries. So all I need to start doing is I always like to measure things in grams. Now, I'm going to make the exception here. I'm going to basically like show you what it looks like in ounces and also in grams. I'm going to keep it in grams for now, but all I do is whenever I add all the ingredients or everything that is going to be on the plate, I'm going to switch it over to ounces. You can see the equivalence that exists. Based on what I taught you at the beginning, 1 ounce of food is equal to 30 grams in net weight. So we're going to grab the strawberries that we have in here. I'm going to weigh, let's see if we have at least 50 grams in here just so we can kind of start off on this. So I'm going to start adding some strawberries on there. So that's, I think we can probably get up to like 100 grams. So that's about 104 grams. If I wanted to convert that into ounces, you keep everything the same. You just change the mode or the setting on the actual scale, and you can turn that into ounces, which is going to be equal to about 3.6 ounces. If you multiply that times 30, it's going to be closer to the amount of grams that we just got, which is about 104 grams or so, okay? So we have the strawberries. Let's say that we wanted to make like a fruit bowl that has also some blueberries in it. Let's say this is breakfast. You zero it out. This is when you're weighing out multiple things. Keep in mind, zero it out. Not because a lot of times like you have the plate and everything, but you need to make sure you put it again in zero. And now you're gonna add, let's say 50 grams of strawberry or blueberries. So I'm gonna start adding some until I get to closer to 50. So that's close. And 50, straight, right on the money. Perfect. That's a simple addition. Now, let's say we wanted to add some bananas now into this. Again, you need to keep note of this stuff and the weights that you're adding. Like you have 100 grams of strawberries, 50 grams of blueberries, and let's say that now you wanted to add, let's say half a banana because you're just trying to make sure you're a little bit more mindful of like total carbohydrates. So we're just gonna say, we're gonna grab like maybe like half of this, we're just gonna cut it in chunks. We're gonna zero it out, and we're gonna add the half a banana in there. Just need to make sure you keep in mind how much. That is about 70 grams in total. So now you have all these ingredients, and at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how it would log all these foods and all these different areas into MyFitnessPal or a food tracker, so you know exactly what these numbers represent as far as like macronutrients. And that's exactly how you weigh food or fruit specifically. All right. We're going to finish up, well not finish up, we still have a couple things that we want to make sure that we weigh in. Bread, a lot of times like people ask me about bread, and things like sliced bread that comes in a package is easier, but for example, last night we were really feeling like we wanted to have some sandwiches, some like, you know, French bread and stuff like that. So I have some in here that I wanted to show you how I would weigh, because some breads are pretty standard as far as like, you know, the amount, how they're made and stuff like this. So for example, if you search French bread on MyFitnessPal, they may actually show up some options that are like check mark, which is something that has been verified. And all you need to do is actually weigh to see how much you're actually consuming. It's a good way for you to track, and also visually, it can help you understand how much bread you're consuming, for example, when you go to a place like Jimmy John's or Subway. So I'm gonna put a plate in here just so I can weigh some, you know, so you can have an idea of bread. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple. I just kind of wanted to show you that you can do this kind of stuff. This is, for example, so 3 pieces, about 60 grams. That's all you need to make sure you log in there, so it's going to be a lot more accurate as far as the amount of carbohydrates that you're going to be consuming in that specific food. All right, so now that we learned how to track or how to weigh things out separately, like dry foods, wet foods, and all kinds of different things like that, you're probably still wondering, how do I weigh cooked foods? And this could be tricky for many different reasons. Number one, a lot of times when you're looking at, this is an example of mixed rice, or this is just like rice in general. Let's just pretend this is white rice. It's the only thing I have left over at home. So, but anyways, so you have some rice in here. So if you weigh this out, like when it is completely dry, it's not the same as it is cooked. Rice and starches actually increase the amount of weight as they're cooked because they absorb water. So I kind of established a rule of thumb for most of my clients just to ensure that they weigh everything out cooked. It's a lot easier. Now, if you're gonna start to weigh things uncooked, make sure you keep it that way. Now, you're gonna look like, for example, if you're for when it comes down to like grains and starches and things like that, if you're using rice and it's uncooked, it's going to be tricky, because if you make 1 cup of rice and it makes 2 or 3 or 4 servings, you need to make sure that you separate those servings out equivalently so you don't mess up as far as like tracking accurately. Now, I do have cooked products in here, cooked options in here. We have some rice and we have some rotisserie chicken. I'm going to show you how I put things into a plate. Let's say, for example, you're pouring yourself or you're putting yourself you're fixing yourself a plate for lunch or something. How you actually weigh things out separately, but then put it all together at the end. So I'm gonna grab one of these plates. And then I'm gonna start obviously with the cooked rice. So I'm gonna zero these out. I'm gonna grab a spoon, and then let's say, for example, I don't know how many grams in here. I'm just going to weigh it out, and then I just wanna make sure I keep a mental note of how much I put on there. So I'm gonna add this rice on here. So this is going to be about or closer to 67 grams. If you ask me, that's going to be closer to like 1/3 of a cup. You can also measure that. This is something that you can do with cooked food, so you have an idea of what that looks like in all different settings. You can grab, like for example, a cup, and you can see, okay, this is like a cup of rice, and put it on the scale just so you can see also what that represents in weight for that specific food choice. So that's a simple thing that you can do. Now we have the rice weighed in. We have 65 grams. Keep that in mind, write it down. Now we're gonna zero it out. Now we need to make sure that we add the cooked chicken. So we have rotisserie chicken. Let's say I'm gonna add, this is where I actually change things up. I don't like to weigh chicken in grams because most people and most restaurants, they would actually use ounces as the main source of, or like the main way that they measure things out. So it's easier for you to remember. So I would change the mode to ounces. So now it's in ounces, it's zeroed out, and I'm gonna start adding. I'm gonna say for me, my standard is going to be closer to 5 ounces. So I'm gonna start adding chicken until it adds up to closer to, let's just say 4 ounces for today because I don't think we have enough. Actually, almost 5. So that would represent 5.1 ounces of cooked chicken. And that's exactly how you look at this. If you wanted to know how much that's in grams, remember 1 ounce, 30 grams. So that technically is going to be 5 times 3 is going to be 150. So if I switch it over to grams, 149. So that's pretty much equivalent. So that's a good way for you to understand exactly the difference that exists between that. And that's how you cooked, or that's how you weigh cooked foods. Very important. If that chicken would have been uncooked, it would have been a higher weight because it hasn't released the water. So remember this. With grains, whenever you cook them, they absorb water. With meats, whenever you cook them, they release water. So it's opposites. That's why a lot of times that you have to understand how to weigh things out the proper way, depending on what it may be the case. This applies to in grains, things like pastas, things like quinoa, rice and so forth, and for meats such as and things like fish and red meats and chicken and turkey as well. So hopefully you found this helpful, but this is the way you would do it for cooked foods. All right, so now that you know how to weigh foods, you have all the knowledge, so you know how to do cooked foods, fruits, dry stuff. Now we need to put it all together, and then I need to teach you how to track this stuff on food trackers, such as, for example, MyFItnessPal. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the MyFItnessPal and my phone on your screen, or on the screen, so you can look to see as we're actually go through this process. So I'm going to open up MyFItnessPal. It's a food tracker that you can use, but you can use other things like my macros app, Lose It. There's many different things, different options that you can kind of have in there. So the first thing that I always teach my clients is to ensure that they're selecting options on MyFItnessPal that have been verified. So for example, if you can see on the screen, you can see that I have some things that I have like logged in the past that have the little check mark. Not because, just because it doesn't have the check mark doesn't mean that it's a bad food to log, but a lot of times I do have the dietitian brain that allows me to understand when something is accurate or not, but maybe you don't. So that's a big thing, that it's important for you to always try to find options that are verified first. So we're gonna go ahead and try to build a meal. I'm going to show you how to do this based on the stuff that we weighed. If you remember, I kind of have the numbers fresh in my mind of what we weighed as far as chicken, the rice. We're essentially going to build a plate, and I'm going to teach you how I track this entire thing. So I'm gonna put the scale on the side because I'm just going to pretend that I was doing this as I was weighing food. So as you remember, I had some rotisserie chicken and some rice, about 5 ounces of chicken, and about 65 grams of rice. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna first search for the rotisserie chicken. I do have one that is from Costco that seemed pretty good. The rotisserie chicken, I couldn't find one that was verified, but that seemed pretty adequate for what it was. And so I'm gonna go in here, I'm gonna put in there 5 ounces, so you can see it on there. and now it has been added. Let's say that you're like, okay, I have a lot of different things and I don't want to like go one by one. You can optimize this process on MyFitnessPal by going to add foods, and at the bottom of the screen you can see one thing that reads multi-add, and you can start adding multiple things and search for multiple things at the same time. So we're gonna go ahead and add some rice, we're gonna add some of the bread that we weighed in there as well, we're gonna add some of the fruit in there from what I remember that we weighted. So let's say now we're gonna do into rice. So let's say this is white rice. So I'm gonna go rice white, and then this one is cooked. I always search for cooked options. So I'm gonna go into it. This is 100 grams, so you can change the serving size to essentially be represented as, in this case, it doesn't have a 1 gram mark, so I'm just gonna go to base it on 100 grams. Now, of course, I didn't weigh 100 grams, I weighed less. So what I do is, in this case, I'm going to put 0.65, which is technically 65 grams if you think about it. So I'm going to log that, it's selected. Now I'm going to go ahead, this is obviously already all logged in and added. I'm gonna go ahead and add my fruit plate that I'm gonna have for dessert. So I'm going to search in here for strawberries. So we have strawberries in there. We weighed about 105 grams. So that's selected, and you can see on serving size it says 1 gram, so that's ideal. We're going to add some blueberries. So blueberries are about 50 grams what we weighed. And then we're gonna add some bananas, and the bananas were about 65 grams, I believe. So that's all selected, and I'm just gonna go ahead and add it so I can, show you how things are actually kind of like measuring out all together. So as you can see, all those different things are added, and so we're gonna finish it up with, let's say 1 tablespoon of the almond butter that we did, and maybe we're adding into, like, let's pretend that that's maybe like bread, and we're doing like well, that is actual bread, but not necessarily like slices of bread, and we're doing like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So what you can do is, in some cases, I'm going to show you here, when you're trying to add a food and you can actually scan the product and you can scan certain things, you can use the scan feature. Obviously, I don't have anything specific that I can scan, or actually I can do this. I can scan this almond butter to make sure it's accurate to what the nutrition represents, and I can search in here, and that's perfect. So it says 2 tablespoons. You know that you weighed on the first time 2 tablespoons when you thought it was 1, we're just gonna pretend it's 2, and that's exactly what's selected on there. I'm going to add it, and the last thing we'll do is we'll add the bread. I'm not gonna use that, I'm just going to pretend I'm gonna use, like, I like to use a brand called Dave's Killer Bread. So I'm gonna go in here, and I found one, so I'm gonna go into maybe like 1 slice that I had, and I'm going to add it. So that specific meal that I just logged, you can see at the top, I use the premium version of MyFitnessPal. It's gonna have 63 grams of carbs, 30 grams of fat, and 50 grams of protein, which is equivalent to about 700 calories. It's a pretty high calorie meal, but just so you understand exactly how I logged all those different foods into MyFitnessPal in the most accurate way possible. Now, is it extremely precise? Not necessarily, but this is the closest that it gets when you're controlling every single food that you are adding. And the same thing you can do for the rest of the days, and you can kind of see how that stuff starts to stack up, versus or against like your macronutrient requirements that you have for the day. So hopefully you found that helpful. And just to finish up, remember, tracking foods and weighing foods is not for everybody. Again, it depends on the goals that you're trying to establish. It depends on what you're trying to do. But if you want accuracy in your nutrition and your goals, and you want to fast track that process, accuracy and consistency become the key in this process. So I invite you to experiment in the kitchen a little bit. If you have any questions about what scales to buy or how to weigh certain things, do not hesitate to reach out. Make sure you drop a comment below if you found this helpful, if you found this super interesting for you, or if you have any questions or something that you would like to learn more about in this specific topic that I can teach you as far as like food weighing or macro tracking or how to log foods in the proper way. So if you found it, like I said, this helpful, make sure you comment below, drop a heart in there as well, or give us a like, and I'll see you guys on the next video on Viva Nutrition. Thank you so much for watching.